Hello, my sweet peas. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to take a chance to apologize in advance for the difference in audio. My audio in this episode is extremely blown out. I didn't use my headphones for the first time in a podcast interview, as well as my guest's audio is very quiet. At some points, it almost sounds like a whisper. So you're probably going to have to adjust the audio on your end to lower my voice and raise my guest's voice at certain points. I deeply apologize. As you guys know, listening to all of the episodes, I've never had an issue with my audio being blown out before, but I'm always learning new things, and so I will be taking this into consideration. I did my best to fix the audio, but there weren't many things that I could do once it was recorded, and I'm serious. This episode is incredible. There's so many beautiful things that my guest brought to this podcast. So thank you for understanding, for sticking around. If you're somebody that works in audio, podcasting, music, and has any tips, tricks, or advice to share with me, please feel free to leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and enjoy the episode anyway. Love you guys so much. And as always, we will begin with 3 deep breaths. So let's take a deep breath in through the nose, softly out of the mouth, in again through the nose, out of the mouth. Last one, deep breath in. You're going to hold it at the top. And as you're holding it at the top, see if you can soften the shoulders, the jaw, the space in between the eyebrows. And when I say 1, let out a nice sigh. 3, 2, 1. So today's topic is going to be when grief doesn't end you, it opens you. And this is going to be a conversation that is a tender and powerful one, because we're talking about grief, but not from the place that we usually hear about it. Not just from the ache and the breaking and the surviving, but from the place of becoming that happens on the other side of grief. And today, my guest is a dear friend of mine, Katherine Searcy, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She's a Reiki master. She's a grief worker. She's a retreat creator. And she walks with people through loss in a way that honors both the sacred ache and the unexpected joy that emerges from grief. And so in this episode, we're going to explore grief as an initiatory path, one that can open us up to deeper aliveness and intimacy with life, even moments of ecstasy. And so if you've ever wondered whether joy can coexist with loss, or you've maybe felt guilty when it does, this conversation is for you. And so, Katherine, thank you so much for being here.
Gracias. Thank you for having me.
And so, fun fact, the first question I'm going to ask Katherine, this is actually our third time trying this out. Katherine lives in Puerto Rico. I live in Peru. So we're bringing and giving gratitude to the lands that we sit on, the Taino lands that Katherine sits on, the Incan lands that I sit on. And so thanking the weather gods, the device gods that this is working out today. But this first question I'm so excited for, because Katherine really has such a myriad of advice to share that I get to receive in my own life. So I'm really excited for you guys to listen to her. So first question, Katherine, when you hear the word grief, what do you wish that people understood often that they don't?
If I had my way, I want people to really know that grief is transformational, that it's not a form of punishment. I told you it was going to come out a different way this time.
And it did, and it was clear, and it was concise. Can you speak into the idea of grief being punishment for people that are grieving in all walks of life?
Okay, so I've been sitting with this, and we've had these conversations in the past, Dan. I think sometimes in our anxious-driven world, we're so oriented to the future that we forget about the past. And I think sometimes we do have to sit with our roots. And our roots, whether you have a connection with spirit, religion, organized religion, but for most of us, we have some sort of anchor there. And for many of us, if we grew up in America, by and large, that is rooted in Christianity and within the church. And our associations with Christ is around suffering, right?
Mm,
And if we are supposed to walk this life as Christ, right, in this, and bear the cross, that means we expect suffering,
yeah.
right? Because God also grieved the Son who
Mm,
suffered, and so we should too.
mhm,
And so lately I've been sitting with, sometimes we feel more comfortable in our pain bodies.
mhm,
And so when we're experiencing grief, I feel like that part of us comes to the forefront. And because we are a grief illiterate society, we automatically assume that grief equals suffering, that
mm,
grief is some form of punishment. That's why I feel like our rational mind um, goes to a place where we grieve, where we're internalizing the grief. In children, we call it magical thinking,
mm,
right? Because their worldview is so limited that it's like I must be the cause of it.
mhm,
But oftentimes, many people, and I just really want to normalize that, is that they will try to figure out what they could have done differently
mm,
to fix this, to have created an alternative reality for it, because
mm,
they are seeing grief as
mm,
something that is painful, which it is, but something that's to be fixed, right? It's
mm,
something to be avoided,
mhm,
right? Where we know that this life is temporary,
mhm,
right? Where none of us are the one thing we have in common
mhm,
is that we will grieve, right? Because the only constant is change. And so I think that's the piece, right? That was a very long-winded answer and maybe a little too deep to begin with. So, but that's where we landed. Um, but I think there's another side to it. And grief isn't here to punish you, right? It's
mhm,
here to really help us expand into a different way of relating.
mm. Mm, a different way of relating. Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. And so we're all going to take a deep breath in and breathe out. That was so eloquently put, and I deeply appreciate the verbiage that you used surrounding this. And so I think from here, I would love to talk. You work so intimately with grief, right? And so I would love to know, and I know that you always say this, is that, like, you get called, right? And so, like, you get called to grief work. And so I would love to know what called you to this work. And I'd also love to know, because you're going to fly with this answer the way that you always do when I ask a question, and it'll be perfect. But, and how, when you got called to this grief work, how you found yourself, if you found yourself looking for your faith, the faith that you grew up with, the faith that you had indoctrinated into, or if it was kind of an afterthought. Was the grief all consuming, and when it called you, were you just trying to get by, or was it also something that was there? Because I know that I've mentioned this to people before too, and they're like, hey, I'm having this weird feeling that I need to go back to the church. I'm like, well, I have a few reasons for why people go back to the church, right? And one of those reasons is if we're heavily grieving and trying to figure something out, like you said, we're trying to rationalize it. So I would love, your background is incredible, and I would love for people to hear what you have to say.
That was all good. Where do I start, Dan?
You
Oh my
start wherever,
goodness.
you start wherever your heart goes. For those of you that don't know Catherine and this is your first time getting to meet her, like, I really cannot express enough. Like, her work is incredible. I'm lucky that she's my fucking friend, so I get to have these conversations on the phone. But if you don't have somebody in your life who creates the space for you, like a big sister, right? You always have that big sis energy, but also really creates the space for you to ask questions about grief. Like, find somebody, because I'm lucky with Catherine.
And I think it really does start. I always tell my clients it starts with the right questions. Like sometimes we're so busy looking for the answers, we're not really sitting with the questions long enough. And so I'm actually sitting with your question. How did I get into grief work? Life, right? This stellium I have in the eighth house. Uh, I was born into this and initiated into grief at a very early age. And so I never thought I would be working with it so intimately. But I think all of us have a grief story, right? And can follow a grief journey if we're encouraged to do so. Um, the actual work really did call me. I was not looking to do grief work. I've landed in like the medical setting.
Hmm.
And so that like one of my first internships was at a hospital. And so that kind of landed me there and found my way there. And hospice, I just remember sitting in my office one day. I was working at this trauma center in Washington, D.C., and I was so over it. Like I was like, oh, I gotta get out of here. And probably like a few minutes later, an old coworker calls me. It's like, hey, are you looking for work? Like, and I was, yeah. And she was like, well, I'm working in hospice now. And there's a position open. I was working as a chaplain at the time, hospital chaplain. And she's like, there's a position open. Are you interested? Yeah.
Can you explain what a chaplain does and then a hospital chaplain for people that maybe weren't raised?
Sure. A chaplain is a like clinical, spiritual guide, director, space holder, right? And so they will hire chaplains in different settings. The Senate has a chaplain, but they're pretty much religious leaders in like more kind of clinical settings
Mhm.
or secular. I was looking for that word. I haven't used secular in a long time. Secular
I
settings, right?
think many of us have used that word in a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. I was like, ooh, let me bring back a church word.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so police departments have chaplains, hospitals have chaplains. Again, they have chaplains for the Senate and the House. Universities, a lot of times people are, if you've gone to university, they usually have chaplains there, right? But usually like some sort of secular setting that is honoring the spirituality, of people in their journey because that is a thing. So yeah, and so they're taught to kind of be inclusive, right? And so to particularly is not one particular religion or spirituality, but just honoring that there's more to us beyond this physical plane and just kind of creating and holding space for folks in that way in these settings. And so it's more of an integrative and a holistic view. So that's kind of what chaplains do. Like sometimes chaplains can provide rights, or they will coordinate that. Like when I was working as a chaplain, they would coordinate that with those faith leaders, right? So we had an imam, we had, whatever, like, a Catholic priest, whoever that was needed. Like we were either able to provide that on our own if that's something we were trained to do and had, the certification to do, or we would like facilitate that process for folks. So they are feeling that, all of them, right? All the parts of them are being honored in that particular space.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for speaking into that, just in case someone hasn't.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so your experience was being called into that space while you were a chaplain. Um, yes, and I would love for you to speak a bit more about your experience in hospice. And I know, you always point out and say like it's been a bit since you've been in the hospice setting and whatnot, but also to for those I feel like I have an interesting the fact that I've witnessed both of my grandfathers passed, but my first grandfather, my grandfather Kenny, he was on hospice for a month, right? And so I got to be there every single day. So I really understand what hospice is. But if you could also give a little bit more background to that as well.
Sure. We love education. Okay. So, I mean, and again, we don't talk about it. So, I can't talk about us being a Greek illiterate society without, providing education to make us more literate. Cool. So I'm glad. So hospice is a form of care, is an elevated form of care that is provided to people that are approaching the end of life. Clinically, and for your insurance to pay for it because we're underneath, capitalism. Typically it's a diagnosis of 6 months or less, right? No one knows, but that's kind of the framework they're operating under. I had clients that lived like they were on hospice for years. right? But they provide support typically in home support. And so, like, people think of a hospice as a place to go, which they do have inpatient units. So that's for like people who are really critical and can't have their needs managed in the home. They have inpatient centers to kind of help them journey through the process. But by and large, hospice is provided in someone's home. And so they can remain in place. They can be surrounded by their loved ones. They can be surrounded by the things that provide them comfort. And they can have some autonomy around like how they're choosing to live this phase of their life. Because I usually don't use the language of, how they're going to die. Is really how are they going to live in this phase of the journey now, knowing that their time is becoming more limited. And so a hospice has a whole integrative team, which that's why I always enjoyed. You have doctors and nurses, but you also have social workers and chaplains. Some hospices have music therapists, pet therapy, all the things. And so to me, it's the most inclusive form, most integrative form of healthcare that I have seen within our medical model.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I would also love to piggyback off of that to literally give people, because I don't think I've talked about this on Wolf Mother yet, but my grandfather Kenny, when he passed, he was on hospice for a month. So in the living room wasn't a living room anymore, right? So they came in and there was a large bed, kind of like a hospital bed, that he at first was able to walk around. And then by the end of the month, he was in the bed, and that was it. There were nurses around. My mom was there every day. My aunt was there every day. They let me be there every day, so I got to witness him receive his last rites, which I thought was so special, especially as somebody who grew up as an altar server and then a child lector and then like a cantor. Like, it felt special for me to see the last rites being given. But it is beautiful, like you said, the autonomy, because he got to be in his home with the things that he always saw. He could say, I want the window open because I want to hear the neighbors. Actually, close the window. I don't want to fucking hear them anymore. Things like that. So I definitely agree that it is a beautiful integration. And I think it just has both of those, like, it's got a lot of grief in it, but it also has so much beauty and gratitude and joy that exists within that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think like because I've experienced people of all ranges, like age ranges in hospice. So I remember there were times that we would work with Make-A-Wish Foundation or the Dream Foundation, and we would coordinate trips for families, right? Like if it was a young family, a young person on hospice, Disney World. I remember I had one coworker that ranged for like this was in Indiana, right? So fitting. But they went to the gun range. Like he was like a gun enthusiast, so she coordinated a trip for the family to go to the gun range to do the thing. But even like mementos, like I remember I worked for one hospice and we would create like the bears, like with the clothes, like with the item of clothing of theirs, handprints, heartbeats, like they would do the heartbeat with music underlay. And so you still get to experience. So just being able to also be so intentional about the transition and being able to create those moments, right, that you can anchor back into. To me, it takes this, again, the suffering piece out of grief, right? Because you're able to build connection and memory and actually make the experience beautiful, right? And create some normalcy around this because it is normal to die.
Thank you.
Right, and not just physically, right, throughout our lifespan. If we're really honoring ourselves and we're really wanting to do this work of living, we're going to die many times. I know there's a quote, Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now, and I'm just going to summarize it because I'm not a Gemini. I can't remember direct quotes like they do. I'm so envious of them sometimes. It's like, oh my God. Anyway, it says pretty much
That person that said that.
like we all have a mutual friend, Colin, right? Like he like sometimes I'm listening to his social media, like on Instagram or something. He's just and as Esther Perel says, blah 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 blah. I mean, it's a whole paragraph he's quoting. I'm just like, how do you do
Yes, his
that?
name is Colin Bedell. If you don't know him, queer Colin, he's incredible. But literally, and it could be we're sitting down having a meal at a table, and he pulls something out. Like, it's not just on social media.
yeah, I was just like, I cannot, like, I just can't.
Yes.
Anyway, but the quote is like pretty much the point of life is to die before you die and realize there is no death.
Okay, I would love for you to speak into, because I know rather, that when we learn about death or when we learn about grief and we teach about grief, most people are going to grief circles because they're like, this person died in my life. I should be at a grief circle. But could you speak into, like you're saying, the other deaths that happen before you pass on in this lifetime? What can grief also look like besides grieving somebody that has passed on?
So, in our clinical language, we call this disenfranchised grief. And that is and most of us know what disenfranchised mean, right? It's kind of like, the things that are on the edges, that are on the margins, the things that aren't readily seen. When we immediately hear the word grief, we associate it to the loss of a loved one,
Mm-hmm.
right? So someone has died. That meant a lot to you. I am grieving. Um, but and so then it would be interesting to hear people. This is my first experience with grief. My grandmother just died because a grandparent just died, right? That's usually their first intro into grief, right? Um, and so they'll say, "Oh, this is my first experience with grief." I'm like, "It's not.
Mm,
It is not, right? Because if you've experienced any level of change, there has been a loss.
yeah.
Something has died, right? It's the ending of this way of you experiencing something. It has come to a close.
Mm.
The book is complete, right? On this phase. Now it might be a part two.
Exactly. And
Right? Right? It might be a part two, but this version of it ceases to exist.
mm,
And we've all experienced that,
yeah.
right? The ending of a job, right? Ending of going to school, right? You graduate from school. There is a death that comes to that. I know sometimes it's a death of being a student,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh yeah. That's a big one that people don't realize. You've went to and I know you also with the clients that you have specifically right now that they are, kind of in that 20-30 range.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've seen it with my clients as well where they've been like, I don't know what happened. I just all of a sudden feel so lost. I'm like, cuz all you've done is go to school and now you got your masters and you're like, "Well, what the fuck am I supposed to do now?"
Get my PhD.
Staring at it. They're like, should I get a second master's? I'm like, let's really think if you want that.
As someone who has it, I mean, I'm glad I have them.
Right.
But also, I loved being a student. Like, there was parts of me. Now, I would not, like, you couldn't pay me any money on God's green earth to go back into academia. Like, people were like, you should get a PhD. I always heard that. I was like, for what, though? Like, what? For what? I'm
Mhm.
good. I will do a self-study, okay? I will create a whole self-study if I need to. Oh, I'm okay.
There it is, raising your hand. Hey.
And I know I was like, hey.
Watching this on YouTube, we're doing this on Zoom, and Catherine is officially raising her hand at me. Zoom is letting me know. But with that being said, yes, that's also something that I tell people is like, you can be a lifelong student without getting another degree. But I love that you brought that up because people don't recognize how much of a grief experience that is, especially if you've consecutively never taken time off. This is very specific to the United States of America. You've never taken time off after you graduated high school. You immediately went into undergrad, then you went into graduate, then you said, well, either I'm going to run a marathon or I'm going to get a second undergraduate, right? Like that feels like it's the two that happen. So thank you for naming that in the space.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's the transitions of life, right? With every transition, there's always a death, right? There's a death and a rebirth. That's the cycle. That is the cycle of life. And I think the more we get connected to moving back into the rhythm
Mm-hmm.
of nature that our foremothers, forefathers were programmed to, the more that we honor the death rebirth cycle.
Right.
But yeah, like you have it, everyone has a relationship with grief. Now, whether you identify with it, right, whether you make space for it, right,
Mm,
whether you're conscious of it is a whole different conversation. But all of us have an experience with grief.
mm. Okay, so to that point, that we all have an experience with grief. I I love How do I want to word this? So we've discussed before, and now going back to the idea that we are not Geminis and can't remember stuff or shit, but we talk so much about everything. We have something to say about everything. There is the idea of the stages of grief. And right, and so both of us have had this conversation before, and I don't know if you can remember right now. I can't remember who it is that talks about the staircases of grief. And
Still
we don't.
can't remember.
Yep. And so, and you think either of us would have looked it up? Nope, it's fine. We're right back where we are supposed to be. And with that being said, the reason why I love that is because I've said before, the idea of the staircases of grief makes so much more sense to me, because sometimes it feels like the stairs are very small and I can hop down to the next step, and the grief doesn't feel like I'm not wearing it. It doesn't feel like it's the cloak that's over me so I can step down. But then there are other days where the next step down that spiral staircase is so far from me. Like I just don't have it in me to get to that point. And so I would love for you to give any of the teachings that you intuitively feel to respond to the stages of grief, because I also want to begin to talk about like what joy practically looks like inside of a grieving process.
Okay. I want to take a moment for that.
Yeah, so let's all take a deep breath, because I know we've said so many things.
What's coming up for me first? I love when someone always wants to ask me for like resources or like a book or read. Like they want me to give them a book with them or like resources. And I have none to give. I have none to give. Because this isn't a problem for you to fix, right?
Yes.
And because we have been educated in a way that our resources have been deemed insufficient, right? Just think about the ways when we are having to write a paper in school. It's so interesting we keep going back to school, but that's where we're landing. You had to write a paper for school, right? You had to cite sources, right, to back up your point, right? And so because your point wasn't valid on its own, right? You needed someone else who is deemed an expert, right? That
Yeah.
is smarter than you, done more research than you, better than you, right? To validate your point in order for it to be sufficient,
Right.
right?
Can you see the disgust on my face as you were saying that?
I'm thinking about it, right? Because I'm having a little trauma response thinking about MLA format. Back in the day, we had to do MLA, right?
Yeah.
Right, when we had to cite, right? You had to, you had to cite your sources, right? You needed to have sources and cite them. Otherwise, it's plagiarism got you in trouble, right? Could have you failed a class, whatever, some sort of, you were penalized for it. But you also couldn't just hold an original thought on your own.
Right.
I don't like giving referrals to grief work because all it is really is someone else's experience of grief, right? It's their experience, which doesn't invalid, and it's fine if you just want to read someone else's experience, but it doesn't mean now you have to follow what they say the grief experience should be. And that's why I don't do it, because really we should be creating our own experience. And I'm going to probably wind up writing some form of a grief book, but I'm also going to acknowledge this in my grief, like, hey, this is my story of grief, right? This is just to kind of validate and normalize your experience, but I'm here to help you understand that you get to formulate, create, and nurture a narrative that fits your grief journey, because all of our grief journeys look differently. I say all that to say, when we talk about the stages, I don't believe like the stages aren't really a thing, right? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, where we get the stages from, there's 5 stages of grief she talks about. Can I remember them? I don't know. Acceptance, denial, anger, bargaining. One more.
One more. One more.
And one more, right?
Conversations go, and the other thing that they said.
And the other thing she said. And so we kind of lock into no shade on Kubler-Ross, right, in her work because she did beautiful work. Just a
Mhm.
couple of things about that work, right?
Right.
One is she was studying people who were at the end of life, hospice patients,
Boom.
and their experience of their mortality, not grief, right? Not the grief and the bereaved of others, right? It was so she wasn't studying their family members. She was studying their grief as they were coming close to the end, right? And what they experienced, they were facing, that's very different
Yep.
than than the bereaved mourning and grieving.
Yeah.
So, right. But we cling, so we just push that to the side for those who cannot see, right? We
Yes.
just push that to the side, right? So there's space for that, but I think we cling to the stages because we want someone to tell us what to do.
And that, to that piece, that part, that is where I feel people desire to go back to organized religion.
Right. Because it gives you a ritual, which is fine, but it's also okay, right? Because we embrace both and here. Dan and I, we love the both and we don't do absolutes, okay? Because we like nuance, we like space, right? We like spaciousness, we like abundance. When we're talking about that, means there's space for all of it, right? So there's space for the sacred, there's space for ritual. Ritual does ground us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in grief, we do need those things to anchor us. That's the other thing that is a little problematic about, the people like I'm spiritual, not religious piece. Because
Right.
spirituality is beautiful, but there's no real ground to it unless you're like really having a practice
Yes.
but there's something beautiful about religion because you're ingratiating yourself in practices and rituals that have been rehearsed
Mm-hmm.
for for generations,
Yes.
right? The same mantras, right? The
Mm-hmm.
same prayers,
Yep.
right?
The same thing's going on at midnight mass that has always been going on at midnight mass.
Right? The same mantras that have been repeated for maybe thousands of years in Hindu, in the Hindu faith tradition, right? So many things. And so it really elevates the experience, but it grounds you. And in grief, you kind of need that grounding. I'm telling people now as we're kind of going through the chaos of the death of the US, right? Because it is dying, y'all. Right? Like this is where I feel like faith is so important because you need understanding when you are moving through a society that's being kind of deconstructed, where it's starting to cave in, where things are not normal anymore. They never were, but they're no longer normal, but you're seeing how this system is failing in
Mm-hmm.
real time. Then you need something else to latch on to. And
Yep.
to me, this is where the integration of faith is so important. And this is where religion could really be substantial because it allows you to anchor in something that is unseen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is the place, this is why religion has been so great because it allows us to kind of be able to understand from a different lens, from a different perspective. And so when we're talking about the spiral, because I'm going to bring it all together, y'all. When we're talking about the stage, like we're wanting the stage, we're wanting to see things from a linear perspective, right? Because we like steps, like it's A, it's B, it's
Right.
C, it gets me to F, right? 1 + 1 = 2. It's going to get me to this place. That is not grief.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Grief is really a spiritual journey, no matter what you believe, you're agnostic, atheist, whatever. But it is a spiritual journey. It really is about this merging of the seen and the unseen. It's very much a liminal space. Because of that, it is not like a thing for you to accomplish. Like it's so interesting hearing people, but it's been a year. I should be over this. I'm just like, it's just been a year. You're
Right.
just going through the first, and you have to go through the seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a year is nothing, and there's no time frame. Grief does not care about time.
Nope.
It's not under grief is not under social contract. It's a medicine. It's a teacher, right? It's not under social constructs. It's not under those systems. So it doesn't give a damn about how long it's been. Right. It could feel like yesterday. It could have been 10 years ago. Sometimes my dad he transitioned. This is going on the 8th year, February 18th, 2018, was his transition date. Sometimes it still feels like yesterday. I'm moving on the 8th year, right? Um, But and so we instead of seeing it as this line, right, and these things, right, stages. I've gone through these 5 stages. Am I done? Right, all of that. Can we see it as the spiral that it is? And so when we talk about it being a spiral, or some people reference grief as a wave,
Yep.
right? We wave in the grief. Like sometimes that wave comes and crash over you. Sometimes the waters can be calm, right? Sometimes you're riding the wave as great as a surfer. I'm across the street from the beach, so I was watching them this morning. Sometimes you're just on a crash out.
Yep.
That is grief. Same thing with the spiral. Sometimes we find ourselves spiraling up and down the staircase of grief. Yes. And so sometimes we're spiraling down into it, right? When we're kind of in the thick of it, we feel the heaviness and the darkness. It's not bad though, y'all. Like we all have dark and light, right? And so we are experiencing kind of the heaviness of it, but we can also spiral up. And to your point, Dan, about the joy, and this is when we start to allow for us to experience something besides the heaviness and despair and the suffering and the pain, because you also experience some good things with this person, maybe or not. You may not have, right? But you also have permission to live life, right? Because with this death of something or someone, there's also a death of yourself,
Right.
right? But we need to also begin to move through. Won't need to. Like I give people autonomy, so I'm just correcting my language. We give space for people to move through a rebirth, right? And so that's where the joy comes in. It's just like I can give myself permission to live and to experience things that now feel good for me. It doesn't always have to feel painful. It can also feel pleasurable, right? Just even if I decided to go and get a bowl of ice cream, or go listen to music or something just to relieve myself of the pain and heaviness of grief for a moment. I get to make space for that. And as we continue to move through the journey, on the other side of grief is joy. Like if I was to counterbalance grief with something, I think it would be joy, right?
Yeah.
Because joy kind of brings you back into your body where grief disconnects you a bit.
Beautiful fucking answer. Thank you so much. I think there's so many pieces of the puzzle to respond to, and I would love to ask you a question. Before we continue this episode, I want to remind you that Wolf Mother Podcast is part of a larger body of work here in this incredible world. And I am Dan. I am a guide for deep, radical healing, transformational embodiment, and raw authenticity. So if something in today's episode began to stir you from within and you're interested in going deeper with ceremony, mentorship, and community, make sure to check the show notes. Because as you were talking, I actually remembered the morning that, for me, I've witnessed multiple family members pass on, and nothing has impacted me as much as putting down my dog. And now I was there with her when I was the only one in the room because it was still COVID and you could only have one person at a time. And I was not prepared for how they do it, even though they told me, like, you're just not prepared for that moment. And I remember we left, and my partner at the time, it was Billy, and he got breakfast, and we got back to the house, and I just stared at the bag, and he was like, Dan, come on, like, eat your bagel. And I was like, how can we eat? And he was like, you have to eat. Like, eating is going to be good. It's going to ground you down. It's going to make you feel like you're here. And then I remember later that day, and I felt so guilty in that moment for enjoying it, but I made a cup of tea and I went to the ocean, right, in Staten Island. They're not the greatest beaches, but they're beaches nonetheless, right? And so, love the land. And the sunset, it was the most beautiful sunset I had seen in so long. And I sat there and I sang with my ukulele and I drank my tea. And I felt a piece of me like torn because I was like, oh, this felt so good and so nice. And then the other piece was like, oh my God, how can I enjoy this without Jeej? Like, she loved the beach. This was her spot, that I came to. And so I would love if you could if you have a moment that you could recount where that has happened for you, or if there's any piece of you that could speak to when you first feel that joy, like what intuitive words would you say to somebody who's like, oh, I felt the joy, but now I kind of got to push it away because how can I feel the joy without them here or without that piece of my life here? And we can take another deep breath, we can take a beat, whatever.
Yeah, let's take a pause for a moment. Mm. Mm. That's a really powerful question, Dan. Mm. I don't know if I have one answer. It's so funny you were talking about your dog. I think I got a little distracted too because you were talking about your dog, and then I remember when like my husband had to put down my dog, and I was working at hospice at the time. Like I remember I was in like we do an interdisciplinary team meeting, like where we discuss all of our patients, whatever. And I remember him, I think he must have texted me or something and let me know that, Destiny had, transitioned. And I remember like having this like this emotional like, I just started crying. And I
Of
left
course.
the office. And I remember my team coming and following me. Like, because we worked as a team. It was a nurse, social worker, chaplain. Like, and so we would go out all the time to do our client visits. And so, but I remember them, and I was recalling like the clients that I really had personal relationships with. Because what happens, we blur boundaries all the time in hospice. We're too feely. But I remember those times, like as soon as they knew, they were just like, we were kind of wrapped each other
Yeah.
because we knew like they held something more than just this clinical relationship. Like
Mhm.
anyway, and I think about it and smile, like to me, because that's the joy, right? It's the other side of it, being able to just see the growth. Because that was also me as a new hospice worker, and so I remember like the intensity of the emotions early on because I wasn't used to it, and I know as the more I became seasoned, the more not that I was more disconnected, but I was just more grounded in what that grief journey looked like. That it
Okay.
didn't affect me, like the impact wasn't as intense as it was at the beginning. And I think that's where you can really start to experience joy. It's just like, because I'm here to tell you the intensity isn't going to be that way the entire journey. And I think that's why people are a bit afraid of grief and apprehensive around grief because they think it's all intensity all the time. And so, again, because we're all or nothing,
Yep.
we feel like
Black.
it has to be super intense or we have to compartmentalize,
Mm-hmm.
right? We got to lock it away.
Yep.
Those are my two options. And I think in the middle, right, as we mediate, we land in the heart, right? As we think of like the energy centers, right? The chakra system, right? The heart is the bridge. It bridges the physical and the spiritual. And when we're starting to think about incorporating joy and pleasure, this is sacred work. It's all
Yeah.
sacred, right? All of it's sacred. But when we're starting to kind of cross over that bridge, and entering into it, because when we're starting to incorporate joy and grief, that means we're having a more elevated view of the grief experience. We're able to kind of see it, you know, from 360, right? A bit more. We're a bit more expansive in our view. I think for me, acceptance, it is one of the stages, y'all. So, but acceptance does begin to open up into the heartbeat of joy. Because once I got over the anger,
Mm-hmm.
because the anger is real and it's normal and it's okay. So be angry. But once I got over the anger of my father's death, I was able to move into the acceptance. And I remember having a dream about him. I dreamt that he was going to die about a week before he died. And it was inevitable, right? Like, I mean, the writing was on. And again, I did this work. I was a hospice social worker when my dad died. And I wasn't with him. I was living in Indiana. He was in DC. But, I started to see the signs. So it wasn't a surprise. Like, I was kind of always anticipating the phone call.
Okay.
But when I finally got it, I pretty much had to tell the doctor, I was like, he's dying. Like, because doctors are weird. They
Yeah.
don't like saying, they don't like talking about death. They're very weird. No shade to the doctors who are listening, but y'all can be weird.
Right.
But I initially I was relieved. I was relieved that he was no longer stuck in that body because that body really did limit him. He wasn't the same person that I knew him to be. So it was
Right.
this anticipatory grief. That's another term that's
Mhm.
used, anticipatory grief. Like we're anticipating the grief. So we'll start kind of going through grief responses, grief reactions prior to death.
Mhm.
A lot of people experience, especially with loved ones they may be caring for, to have dementia, right?
Yes.
You're starting the grief journey early on, right? Because you kind of see where this is heading and you're starting to already miss them because parts of them are missing, right? And so you're starting the grief journey there. But when I got to acceptance, I was able to know that there was joy because he told me. Like I saw like in my dream, there was we were on this cliff and he was dressed in white, younger version of himself, dressed in all white. And he was encouraging me to take the leap. He was like, it's
Mm.
time for you to take the leap. I was like, that's deep over there, sir. Right. But that's when I leaped into my business. That's what leads me into my work because I had to find something else. He also would tell me since I was a little girl, I know you're going to be sad when I die. Because especially black men, they're always prepping you for death because they never think they're going to have a long life. Because
Right.
we live in the US. Um
That part.
yeah, so they're always kind of prepping to have a short life. And so ever since I was a little girl, he would like kind of prepare me.
Hmm.
And he would always tell me, you're going to be sad and you're going to feel like you're broken, but you're going to have to keep living. Like you
Hmm.
always tell me that you're going to have to keep living. And I think that's where the joy is inserted, right? I had to fulfill that promise. I had to figure out ways to keep living because I didn't
Yeah.
want to be here anymore.
Right.
And grief can leave you that way. You're not suicidal. Like, it's always like, you're not suicidal. There's no suicidal ideation happening. You just have a low investment in life. It's just like the investment changes. It's just like, what is the point of this? And it's so real and it's so normal. I just kind of wanted to demystify that too. Because if there's someone listening who has experienced that, I just want to normalize that. Now, like if you have a whole plan, let someone know,
Mm.
right? Because we want to make sure you're
Yep.
safe. But when you just like, I don't feel like this living thing, like what is the point of this thing where you're just going to lose everything? And I was there. And I had to find ways, but I told him, yep, I'm going to continue to live. And I think that's where we insert in joy, and that's when we insert in pleasure, because though they're anchors too that allow us to have motivation
Hmm.
to keep living. It makes life worth living, right? Joy and pleasure make life worth living.
Mm. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Yeah. I love when you speak of your father because every time you speak of him, he was always sharing wisdom in
Always.
this in the same way that you, at least in our relationship, are always sharing wisdom, even if you're not intending to. Right? You're just talking to me and then you say something and I'm like, wow. And I'm like, that's great.
Thank
You
you.
know?
Thank you. Thank you
So
for allowing me to share Martin Montague, the Scorpio,
yeah.
with your
Mhm.
audience.
Mhm. Yes. Yes, we love Scorpio wisdom in this space. How could we not, And thank you for bringing him forward, to be with us. And I think to this piece of the puzzle, um, in that is also the fact that joy also in those ways keeps our loved ones, specifically the loved ones that have passed on, the joy keeps them alive in that way when we have the opportunity to have joyous things and talk about them and laugh and say, oh my God, they would have fucking loved this, right? And like those moments.
Yes, yes. I always like encourage people. So I won't give any book referrals to
Mhm.
folks, but I will give a movie referral, and
Okay.
that is Coco.
Stop. Yes. And
Yes.
Dylan and I, not even 6 weeks ago, we watched it. I had a headache going to bed because I cried so much, as if it was the first time I'm seeing it. I've seen it so many times, and every time I watch it, especially as somebody who my parents realized I could speak to the dead when I was 3. Right? They started to notice I was having full conversations describing their loved ones that had passed on. And so as a human that is so easily able to talk to the other side that I constantly want to connect with them, right? In some ways I'm more comfortable talking to them than I am talking to
Yeah.
living beings. Watching that movie is such a beautiful description of at least what I also experience as somebody who can talk to the other side.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what's missing. That's why I love, like, Dias de los Muertos, so, Day of the
Yes.
Dead ceremonies and rituals, or, or even in African religious traditions, and and the focal point around ancestral veneration,
Mm-hmm.
is that because those are the connections. And I think in Western societies, we don't have that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have lost that. And in the Catholic Church, they do, right? Because, Day of the Dead and,
All
and
saints.
All Saints, All
All
Souls
Saints.
collide, right?
Mhm.
They're in the same thing, right? Because it's when the veil is thin, right? Like, this is the
Yep.
times when the veil is thin,
Silence.
between
Mhm.
physical and spiritual. And so they have those rights too. But I think because Day of the Dead, I love the ritual, like, I love the Catholic Church. God bless them. And I love the lighting of the candle, right, and the saying
Yeah.
of the name. There's power to that. But I love Day of the Dead because it's more, right? Like, it's just like it takes you through a whole, like, ceremony and time and celebration. Because
Yeah.
in the Catholic Church, it's not that celebratory piece.
It's very somber.
Right, it's
Mhm.
very somber, it's very stoic.
Yeah.
But that is the Catholic Church,
That's
right? Like, that's I grew up kind of Catholic, with the Catholic schools like my entire life for the most part. Dad and all of them were Catholic, Black
Mhm.
Catholics in DC, whatever. And so I know the Catholic Church pretty well. But yeah, it is like that. It is very stoic. It is very somber. It is very, like, it is the first church. It's
Mhm.
the first church. Uh,
It's the first.
she number one, honey. She number one. You can't come for her, okay? Um, but yeah, but like, I think Coco did such a great job of highlighting the level of connection that is still available, and that how it's so important to continue to connect to memory, right?
Yes.
To connect to them, like,
Mhm.
order, and to include them in part of life. Like, they're still part of our lived experience. And I
Yeah.
think that's what's missing. That's the kind of bridge that's missing in the ways that the West kind of entertains group, because it doesn't. And
Mhm.
so then, and so, like, I'll tell like my grief clients, have you put up your altar yet?
Yeah.
Because your altar is your focal point. It's the
Mhm.
place where you can go. It doesn't have to be a big deal, right? Because ultimately you are the altar. Like, we are altars, guys. I just want to let you know. But then, we're human, and so we like to see things. Like, we need sensory
Mhm.
experiences, right? And so a tangible altar helps, but just a place where you can go and just, like, this is time. I can see, like, mine's is right here. And I'm just gonna tell you, I'm a little embarrassed about it right now because I've been gone for a while and she needs a clean up. And I keep walking past my altar and apologizing to my dad and my grandmother. Like, I am so sorry, y'all. It's looking hellish.
And I know they're just watching you walk by. They're waiting.
So bad over there.
Watching.
Like, there's the glass of water is
Yes.
empty. Like, it needs to be
It's
dusted.
empty. It's not even murky. The whole thing is evaporated at this point. They're like, I'm parched.
Parched.
Catherine.
Like, the liquor is gone. I think the liquor has evaporated. Like, it's a hot mess over there. I promise y'all. I haven't lit a candle or anything. My bad, y'all. We've been living, okay? So,
Which is part of it, which is exactly what we are speaking to. You've been living your life, embracing the joy. And seriously, you really, I feel like since last year, you have just been
oh yeah,
right.
we've been outside.
Oh, in the, yes, in the streets,
We've been in
outside
the streets. We've
the
been in the
street.
streets outside. But I will tell you, it was very intentional. 2025,
Yeah.
like, I dedicated the year of developing my pleasure template. And so, like, all decisions, like, they pleasure and joy were my guideposts, and to continue to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went hard in 2025. Like, oh, okay, pleasure, joy, y'all are the name of the game. Okay, let's do it. Let's
Yes, and you
get
did it beautifully.
it. Thank you so much.
Living vicariously through you in ways, and I'm excited. For me, I feel like for me that's this year. I feel like I figured out last year, that I was like, the fuck am I doing? I gotta get
Yeah.
out, you know?
Right.
And so, but to your point of the altars and stuff like that. And so for me, as somebody that teaches with the Celtic Wheel of the Year, so like Samhain is the time where I always tell people, like, yes, it's the time of the year when we create the altar, right? Samhain is Halloween, Dia de los Muertos, All Saints Day, All
Mhm.
Souls Day, the whole nine yards. However, your ancestral altar is an all the time thing, right? In some closed practices, it is something that you're only putting it up there for something specific, right? But like having that at all times of the year also, I think gives me a grounding reminder that like, in a vain way, I want to be up on that altar someday. I better have somebody else sitting there going, oh, Dan needs a cup of tea. Let me make a cup of tea to put on the altar. I have like a whole menu. And my brother, he makes the joke that he's like, you just adopt dead people. Because sometimes people pass on that I know. And then I'm like, and their family doesn't do anything. But I knew them, right, in this lifetime. And I'm like, oh, I know that they love to drink this. Let me put that out on the altar. Listen, come by. Let's have a conversation, something of that sort. And to me, it at least grounds me in the fact that, yes, we all have the same things in common, which is life and death and change and grief. And at some point, I will have that moment to pass on too. So also enjoy the moments of pleasure and joy and ecstasy and orgasmic creation and whatnot. Because I'm still in the physical body. What a blessing that is.
Well, yeah, it makes sense too, right? Because you're a ceremonialist. And I'm just thinking about, is it, I know you're kind of exploring kind of what your journey with death looks moving forward. Is it okay to talk about,
You
or
can definitely talk about it. Yeah.
okay. Because we've had conversations about, you looking into maybe becoming a death doula in some sort of capacity. And I think what is missing is true ceremony, like, that really kind of grounds us and moves us through one of those other stages that she talks about, y'all, Kubler Ross, and that's denial. Right. Um, because again, and I can just speak to American culture because that's all I know. Uh, but usually the only funeral rites, or end of life rites that we have are usually embedded within religion. Um, and sometimes they're not, what I mean, they can be helpful, but also they're happening in the early days where
Mm-hmm.
you're still numb, because we
Right.
do experience this numbness, right? It is a shock to the system. In order for our systems to protect themselves, it kind of creates this numbness within us, because our bodies love us, and so they're not going to allow us to feel the full weight, the intensity of everything all at once, right? Because it's just like they know that we wouldn't be able to handle it, right? And so our nervous system really knows how to take care of us pretty well. Because the rituals we tend to participate in happens within a few weeks of death.
Yes.
They're typically a blur, just like
Mm-hmm.
when people get married, right?
Yes.
Right, same thing. It's like all this prep, right? All the things, and like most people will report, they if they weren't really present in the
Mm-hmm.
day, it was like a blur. They barely remember parts of the ceremony, right? Same with the funeral, or whatever you did, um memorial service, whatever happened. It's so early, and so it doesn't really get a chance to anchor you because you're so not there.
Right.
You are so MIA. You are so on autopilot
Mm-hmm.
that you really didn't get a chance. So by the time the numbness starts to wear off, usually around 6 to 8 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
you start to feel the weight of it, and you're just like, oh shit. But by that time, it's all done.
I know. Everyone's dispersed.
Everyone is dispersed, the rituals have been completed, back to normal life, and that's when it's needed,
Right.
because now I'm feeling it, and now
Mm-hmm.
I need the relief of it, but now that's all gone.
Right.
And so for you, I really feel like that, like, I don't know, I'm just kind of getting, I started to feel my crown chakra tingle. I feel like that's kind of the space
Mm,
because you are so great at holding ceremony and creating ritual. I
mm.
think that's when people need it.
Did we just come up with an offering?
We
Did you
kind of did. You know how I am. You know
did
how.
you come up with an offering? And again, see, this is how our friendship works, though. We're hanging out, we're talking about the day. Caesar's running around, giving you a run for your money, and then you say something to me, and I go, "Oh,"
Oh,
and
you
I
should have saw Caesar today. He did not do well with the ocean today. It was so funny. I'll have to send you a video, but pretty much my dog, guys, I live across the street from the beach. He loves to fight the ocean because I don't know, he thinks he can win, but like every morning he goes like, but there's like this little rock, it's rocks, this little clip thing. He barks, barks, barks. If the ocean crashes, ocean usually wipes him out. So someone had created an altar. Speaking of altar, someone had created like a little altar on the beach. You'll see if y'all, I am Kat Searcy on Instagram. Go to my stories. It might be in my highlights. I don't know. But someone had created an altar on the beach, and I usually post like something pretty for the day. Like it's my thing. And so I'm like doing like a little, span. I'm just like, ooh, altar to the beach, and I see Caesar having to climb himself up.
oh, he got taken in. You know what? If there's any being that's at least gonna try the ocean, it's gonna be Caesar.
I see him like in the back, like in the background of me trying to get this cute shot of altar and the beach. I see him climbing up from like where the waves had crashed him out, and he's climbing back up on. And for a minute, I thought I was going to have to like run for a rescue, but I was just like, oh, he has it. Like he's getting it. Good job. Anyway, I digress.
Yes, I love that. See, but that's also the piece of the puzzle is also laughing, is also having friendships where you can laugh. Friendships where we've definitely had conversations where I feel like I've been in the swamp of grief is the way that I've said it. I feel like it's been sticky for me. And I can have a conversation with you and I can talk about that stuff. And then we can also laugh about it where I don't feel like I need to be. And I feel like I love the way that you say the spiral, like it can bring you up and it can bring you down. And you can also simultaneously feel those things. And to the point of what you're saying, like, I really feel it's important for people that are listening, to understand that like what you had brought up, which was like, ritual, right? And some people are going to find that in religion. Some people are going to find that in indigenous practices. If you ever visit the Sacred Valley of Peru, for anybody listening, if you ever visit the Sacred Valley of Peru or you come to Cusco, Peru, there is an incredible museum in the middle of the valley, a little bit of a bitch to get to because, of course, why wouldn't it be? But that museum, it gives you the history of all of the indigenous civilizations up until they were conquered by Spain. And then they stop. They don't even go down that rabbit hole. Okay. And so it's so incredible. And I love it because they hit on what every single indigenous community did for death. They talk about birth, they talk about how they ate and how they made music and how, they cultivated their own things, but they also speak about how they all witnessed death as a ceremony, how it was a ceremony for the person dying while they were dying, and then what the community did, which is you're speaking about, the aftershocks, the after waves that come, and how they supported each other as a community when those aftershocks began to hit. So like nervous system work, whatever that looks like for you, the ritual, if it is religion, if it is being in ceremony, like how important those pieces are to continue to have in your life and seek out things that make you feel good with people that are like safe for you to do so. And I feel like that is the initiatory piece to it. That it initiates us into these different beings. But I want to ask you, like, do you feel like there's any specific thing that it initiates us into? Or do you feel like, because what I feel like is grief initiated me into living more?
Same. I'm thinking about, it's so funny. I remember, like, so Dan knows, like, I'm not going to use past tense anymore. I run grief retreats
Yes.
here in Puerto Rico. I was tired, y'all. So I was just like, part of my year of pleasure was
Yeah.
just like, fuck this business. Your girl's tired. Um,
Valid.
so I was just like, everything's done. I'm done. Retreats are done. It's all done. Um, Anyway, but I remember wanting to even get away from the word retreat because, the market became so oversaturated because everyone was doing retreats. And then what I was like, my container was becoming very different than what retreat spaces were looking like.
Yeah.
That I was trying to figure out ways to differentiate. So I remember asking some clients like on feedback.
Mhm.
And I remember one client saying, your this grief experience you host, it's a ceremony.
Yep.
Right. She was like, this is ceremony.
Hmm.
And what I have witnessed, and I bring that up because, I've been able to witness like the gamut of death. Like when I think about my life, and I appreciate doing like spaces like this. I'm really grateful for you having me here because we don't really spend a lot of time. Oh, hi, Blue. Sorry, one of my puppies. Um, we don't spend a lot of time really telling our stories because we're kind of on to the next thing. But when I look at the trajectory, right? Like when I look at what I've experienced, like I've seen full gamut. And watching the women who have come here to the yard to sit that I see where they are now. Like, they're like a few years out now. And I've seen how they have started again.
Mm.
And the ritual initiates us into the 2.0. In grief work, we call it the new normal. I hate that term. It really annoys the hell out of me, but I get it, right? It
Yeah.
is kind of grief is a medicine, is a teacher. It breaks your heart open.
Yeah.
It really does. It breaks your heart open. And the grief journey is there to also help you piece it back together again.
Hmm.
But it's not piecing it the way that it was.
It's a new puzzle.
It's a new puzzle,
Hmm.
right? And so that's the initiation. Is
Mm.
moving through the stages, whatever. But is moving through this piece in order to experience this 2.0 version.
Mm.
Because in this life, we live different lives.
Yeah.
I probably have to live like 15, I don't know. I feel like I've lived a lot of lives
Yeah.
within this one life. I've told a lot of stories. And so one thing grief has allowed me to see is one, not to take life so seriously, especially now. It's real unserious out here in these streets, y'all. It's
Mm.
real unserious. So what you can't do is take unserious things seriously. That's why we have anxiety. Okay. Um, life is not that serious. It's not.
Yeah.
It may feel that way. And I'm not discounting what's happening in the moment, but it's still for living. It is not for
Mhm.
suffering. Right. And so how can we find balance? Two, grief has taught me to live in the moment more because life is short and it
Yeah.
is unpredictable.
Hmm.
And so I don't take it for granted.
Mm.
And so it has taught me just like I'm a retreat creator, retreat curator, but I'm also a life curator, right? I'm just here to create experiences for
Yeah.
myself, right? And I
Hmm.
always tell people like, oh, that's gonna make it to memoir because when I'm 85 and living in assisted living, I'm gonna tell the social worker, right? Like, hey, baby, take down that journal. You see the one labeled 2025? That one is entertaining, honey. Just sit
Yes.
down and
Mhm.
read that.
And
Okay.
God willing, I will also be right there.
Dan, you remember 2025. Tell
Yeah.
Sweetie Pie what I was going through, right? And make me some tea. Somebody make me some tea.
There it is. Exactly. Wow. Yes. Um, so I have two more questions and we're going to round it up. And I feel like one question we'll see how they take us, right? So I
Okay.
feel like you were already kind of answering this question, so I'm going to tell you it's like a two-parter.
Okay.
Wanted to really give this question at the end for somebody that was in the thick of grief right now, what you would want them to know about joy, but also I wanted to bring into the space. Catherine has a beautiful community. It's called Black Girls Grieve.
Yes.
And so I also wanted you to speak to the experience of specifically Black people grieving. And if you had something to say to them as well. Or if you want to package it together, that's fine. If you want to answer one or the other, whatever feels
Hmm.
most important to share.
Damn, Dan, that's a whole nother podcast.
And we can do another episode. That's the thing.
The whole other chat, that's another hour. So I'll answer by why because I've gotten a little anytime I do you know this anytime you try to do an exclusive space where just like it's for a specific a specific population of folks you get some pushback. Why is
Mm-hmm.
it just for Black women? Because it is. I
Mm-hmm.
also don't entertain it. So just
Yep.
FYI, I don't entertain it. It is.
That was the response because it
Yeah,
is.
because it is. That
Yeah,
that that was the response.
exactly.
I'm not sitting here justifying to you why Black people need Black spaces. Like no one has
Mm-hmm.
time. But because I've done it a lot throughout my journey. I remember during the pandemic, I did these Black and brown spaces during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if like I can't come, no, you cannot. Why? Because it's not for you. I don't. It's just
Why is not a question here.
yeah, it's not. I don't.
We're not
I
entering.
love why. Why
Yeah,
why is great questions for your personal journey, not mine.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I created that space, for women who weren't able to make it to the land of Puerto Rico because everyone isn't, for whatever reasons, don't have access to hop on the plane and come here and invest financially in that way. And until I get on my grant writing game, you got to pay for it. Secondly, there are plenty of grief circles.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty.
Mm-hmm.
The feedback I constantly find with ours is that, and it's been plenty of women in our space who attend or have attended other circles. The reason why Black people, Black women tend to seek out Black practitioners, Black clinicians, Black spaces is because they don't have to do the hard work of explaining their experience to someone else on top of them trying to get their needs met. Because oftentimes then you're either not getting your need met because there isn't acknowledgement of your unique experience being a Black person in a system that has undeniably, for its inception, has oppressed you.
Right.
Right. And having to deal with that system on a daily basis on top of your grief.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the space is curated for Black women to come to a space where they're already understood on that realm. Not to say that their grief experience, what's the word I'm looking for? Y'all know that words are not my first language. So I
Words are not your first language.
they are not at
Times
all.
energy is the language. Again, we're not Geminis.
We're not. Sometimes I'm like the word is in my head, like I can't get it out though. But it's not unilateral, and that's not the word I'm looking for. But we all have varied experiences. People, because everyone's a person, right? So we all have varied experiences. But for Black women, we have a different experience. Like we have a different lived experience living in the U.S., right, or living in the West in general. That we're having to deal with on top of what's going on with us personally and internally. And so those spaces are for that. Grief is layered in the Black community because we're constantly grieving on a whole nother level,
Mm-hmm.
right? Ancestrally, we still hold grief, right? Our bodies still hold trauma and grief. And I'm not making this up, y'all. This is research studied, evidence-based,
Mm-hmm.
Go look it up. Joy DeGruy does a great job in explaining this. Go find her YouTube. I'm not going to do it here. But like we have a different lived experience and we're constantly under grief. And interestingly enough, I think people are able to resonate with it now based on what's happened in Minnesota. Just know
Oh,
that's been our lived experience since
it's
we've
been
been
happening.
brought on ships, right?
Yep, it's been that's such a whole conversation. It's been happening. This
Right.
isn't new.
This is nothing new for the Black
Yes.
community. So
Yes.
imagine that that's been our lived experience for generations, right? And so we're constantly like what the grief that, now the entire country is experiencing in Minnesota, what's happened there. What, three times now? Like, I think it's been two, three deaths there.
It's I know for sure it's been two.
I
I
know
don't know
two.
if there's a
I feel
third.
like someone was shot or something.
I,
Someone maybe not killed, but there was something else. I can't remember.
okay.
Yeah, but I was just like, just think about the wave of grief that's happening over these two lives, right? We've
Hmm.
been waving through that for generations,
Exactly.
right? And so it speaks to that. And it also speaks to us having to create space for safety that isn't also given to us. So,
Mhm.
grief already leaves you feeling a bit unsafe, like because you feel
Mhm.
exposed, right? Your
Yeah.
normal coping strategies aren't working anymore. And
Right.
so it leaves you really open and vulnerable. And Black women weren't afforded spaces of safety. We usually have to create them for ourselves. And
Mhm.
so, Black grief is a bit unique because we're having to move through the hypervigilance that usually keeps us away from our grief. We're having to deal with the trauma. And so it starts like grief kind of triggers a whole other things within us that we've experienced. Whether through our ancestry, whether in person, personally, whatever, but it kicks up other things for us
Mhm.
that other groups don't experience. And so it's really unique in that way. So our grief circles are really, it kind of creates that space that they can actually just tend to the grief
Right.
accept and be seen for all these other facets of their life already. It's just like, oh, girl, this is understood. Right.
Right.
Now let's
It's
talk about your son.
baseline at
Right.
least.
This is the
Yeah.
baseline. And so
Hmm.
I don't need to figure out because a lot of times when, Black people are having to come into, white spaces, then you're having to work, but then you're having to do education in order to
Yep.
try to get your needs met. Right.
Exactly.
Or you're just silent and you're just not going to get your needs met. And because even if you do the education, you still may not get your needs met.
Right.
Right. And nobody feels like doing that much damn work.
Absolutely not. No, and it's yeah. That's
Right.
why.
That is why. So that's the why. And Dan's going
Yes.
to share this
No.
with me. So anybody asks, like, here's this podcast, go check her out. I talk about it. You can go listen to it. That's the why. And so that's, grief is grief, but again, everyone's journey is different. And I
Mhm.
think particularly Black women, because we're also usually the caregivers of the nation.
Mhm.
We take care of everything, everyone, everybody. And so then it's also creating space for Black women to feel safe. It's like you get to center yourself and your grief. That's not one more thing you have to compartmentalize and put to the back in order to take care of someone else.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that you needed to share the why.
I know, not at all, but I don't mind doing a little education. It's fine.
I
It's
I
fine.
know how you feel about educating. I do know how you feel about education. And so thank you for that.
Thank you for
And
asking.
yes, and so seriously, if there are any Black women that are interested, yes,
Yes. Yes.
Black.
Feel free to go to my
All of
Instagram.
the show notes,
Oh,
every
okay.
the links are going to be in the show notes. You
Let
don't
me
have to.
shut up, Dan. Let me shut up. Let me act like I'm just here. Dan, you got it.
Exactly, exactly. So then, with that being said, I would. So this is my final question. If you don't have anything else to say on that topic, I know you have more to say,
I have more to say, but I'll leave it there.
but not right now.
We
Exactly.
can land there.
So my final question is something that I ask to everybody that's joined me on Wolf Mother podcast. So let me say thank you so much, and then we'll kind of have some closing remarks. But the question is, if there is a word of prayer that has been sitting heavy on your heart, or that you have felt more recently, or anything that maybe you even feel after also bringing up your father, Martin, into the space, if there's any word of prayer and of intention from him as well, or something you learned from him to share into this space so we can also witness that.
Yeah, can we take a pause here?
Exactly. Yes.
I think I will venerate him. in this. I haven't. I've just made that connection now, so thank you for that, Dan. One thing that I've been moving my clients through is this idea of radical acceptance. And I'm radicalizing it because you're also accepting the shit that you don't like and can't stand, and whatever, deem as a
Mm-hmm.
mistake or failure, all that stuff. Um, but it's radical acceptance. It's really accepting everything as is. It's been funny moving through the times of Trump,
Mm.
within a therapy, within my therapy practice, right? Especially my practice is based in DC. And so, I had a lot of federal workers that have been impacted, people who are, boots on the ground, directly impacted by his policies. And and the anger. Well, it's interesting, right? It's funny. The Black people, we don't have anger because, again, this is not new for
Right.
us. Like, this is par for the course. So it's not their anger. Like, they usually don't come for the anger. Just like, oh, this is another bullshit. This is another shit I got to deal with, right?
Mm.
So our anger isn't so visceral. If you notice a lot of conversation around Black people, and I think it's this thing call to action on our part, and we're kind of just like, we're good, y'all got it.
Yeah.
Because we're good and y'all got it. Like, we have been fighting since we've been here, y'all. Like, you see my hands? Zoom, are you recording them?
Space. Yeah.
They're up. Like, we're cool. We're gonna fall back on this one.
Yeah.
Because we do need to accept that this is what it is.
Mm.
And I think the anger, like, because I see the anger of my white clients, right?
Hmm.
Because they're angry, they're raging. And I
Yeah.
just sit with them. I just like, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So what we do with anger is channel it.
Hmm.
What are we going to do with it? Because
Exactly.
at some point you can be angry all you want, but you also have to accept
Hmm.
that this has always been
Hmm.
the United States of America.
Yep. And they're just
This is
seeing through the different lens.
you're just seeing her now, but this is who
Right.
she's always been, honey. The
Hmm.
Gucci, she just took off her Gucci belt. I always said that the US has always been like the third world country, if we want to talk
Yes.
about third
Perfect.
world country,
Right.
with the
Yes.
accessories, right? We just
Hmm.
accessorized her pretty well. Right, she
Hmm.
had on a Gucci belt and a Fendi hat. Like, we just right. She's just not even getting accessorized anymore.
Hmm.
Right, acceptance. I accept Trump. I accept that he's the president. I accept that these are his policies. I accept that people voted for this. I
Hmm.
accept that, they chose, to experience this versus confronting a system that they're afraid will
Hmm.
do reverse things to them that they have done to other people. I accept that. I'm not angry.
Mm.
I've not been angry this entire time. I'm not angry because I'm not surprised.
Right.
This is who she is, right?
Mm.
Part of the journey is accepting who you are, right? Is that the Lion King? Simba, remember who you are. Was that the Lion King?
I have, look who you're talking to. I don't know.
Are
Look,
you too young? Are you too young for the Lion King, Dan?
oh, no, I'm not too young for the Lion King, but I don't remember shit. That this is both of us always having conversations.
Dan, are you too young for it? Because sometimes with clients and I will like do a movie reference and I have to look, I'm just like, you're too young for that. Ah,
I
annoying.
know.
I think I did a Matrix reference one time. I was like, are you too young for the Matrix?
I feel like that should
Uh,
be a universal.
I feel like there should just be some things that are mandatory, right? There's just
I know.
mandatory watching. I don't know.
What was lying? Anyway.
Anyway, but I think Simba got that from what was his
Okay.
dad's name? See, I can't remember the dad's name right now.
So
Mufasa.
it wasn't
Mufasa.
Mufasa?
Yeah, Mufasa,
Who's
Mufasa, Mufasa.
who
Yeah.
was the bad guy? The
Scar.
Scar. There you go. Look at you. Look at that memory.
Well, I was a child. I mean, I watched Lion King was my I was a kid. But that's why I said, are you too young for Lion King? But they've done iterations of the Lion King, so it's fine.
Yes.
Yes. But I think he tells Simba, remember, like, remember who you are, Simba.
Mm,
Right? It's
yes.
a
He's on
accept
the
that you're
ledge.
wrong. Right, because that was the whole story, right? The whole arc of the Lion King was Simba was running away from himself because he was
Right.
afraid to be king,
Right.
right? So it was his fear of accepting his role, right? And so he was like, I'm going to run away from because look what happened to my daddy, right?
Yeah.
Right. A lot of times, a lot of us are running like grief is in that way. This is a really long answer, so I'm so sorry. Grief. I just saw the time and I was just like, oh shit. This is supposed to be just a wrap up thing, and I'm just like opening up another episode. My bad, Dan. You can cut this out if you need to. But you know, this is like the journey. The journey is really towards acceptance because the acceptance allows us to remember, it allows us to embrace, it allows us to integrate, it allows us to be present. Otherwise, we're just fighting against ourselves. We're fighting against our grief.
Yeah.
We're fighting against what the lessons we're supposed to get from the experience. And that's when we find ourselves cycling through patterns
Yeah.
because we're fighting, we're resisting instead of accepting. And so remember who you are, remember who you've been. It's okay, right? It's okay if you don't love it all. You're not supposed to,
Mm.
right? You just get to be who you are, right? And run towards yourself,
Mm.
not away from yourself. Because fear has you doing it. If there's things you're wanting to do it scared. You're going to do it scared anyway.
Right.
Just do it scared. It's okay. Right. But what is it like for you to run towards yourself? And to me, that running towards yourself is the radical acceptance that's needed.
Mm.
And again, my apologies. That's yes.
Absolutely not. Never apologize. Your words, I love to receive them. I'm so glad that the people that listen to this podcast are going to get to receive that as well. So thank you again for coming, for talking about these things. Whether you're listening to this on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, please leave a comment. Let us know what this brought up for you. If you have more questions that you want us to continue to dive into, because we always have a lot to say. And so we can come back. We can say more. We really could say more.
Always.
And so, Katherine, I just wanted to say thank you so much again. Every way that you can reach Katherine is going to be in the show notes. Continue to stay up to date with her. She does beautiful curated events, retreats, ceremonial experiences, sometimes in the US, sometimes in Puerto Rico, sometimes in Mexico. And so you'll get to see her. But if anything, just make sure that you follow her on social media to stay up to date. And we will see you all soon. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me.